Hey guys, it's the Melblade 5, and I don't think there's been a series quite as divisive, for lack of a better word, and with such toxicity around it as Paper Mario. The first two games were great, and I love Thousand Year Door. Then Super Paper Mario turned off a lot of fans with it being a platformer instead, but got a much more positive reception years later. And then we entered the modern era of Paper Mario, starting with Sticker Star, which everybody hates. Except me. I actually kinda like Sticker Star as a guilty pleasure. I don't think it's a very well designed game, but I like the basic concept of the battle system and the charm in its visuals and writing. But I do agree with everyone else that it was very dumbed down in terms of gameplay, story, and characters compared to the previous ones. And then we got Color Splash, which was more of the same. I didn't even play Color Splash because I kind of forgot about it since it just did not interest me from the trailers, and also because I felt pressured into not getting it from the rest of the internet who were already hating on it. But then when it came out, everyone started saying it was good because of its charm, which Sticker Star did already and really annoyed me at the time due to the double standards people were showing. Then later on, they all started saying it was bad, like Sticker Star, to make quadruple standards. This whole situation is the background information for the moment when, in 2020, we got a new game. Paper Mario, the Origami King. I was on my phone one day when I saw the reveal trailer for this game pop up, initially thinking it was a fan-made concept due to everyone joking about a new Paper Mario being based around origami anyway. But then I saw it was on the official Nintendo YouTube channel and knew it was legit. Just from seeing this trailer, I was actually pretty excited for it. It was following the same formula as the previous two, but it was showing some clear signs of improvement. We got an original character other than just the companion, Bowser not being the villain again, and even partners returning, albeit in a smaller capacity, fixing things I genuinely disliked about Sticker Star that were present in Color Splash 2. So I was really looking forward to this game from the get-go, though I still had some concerns. Plus, I did initially feel a bit of that same pressure I suffered from before, as there were a bunch of people already hating on it and saying it's exactly like Sticker Star, despite not being out yet. And even some who were being pretty immature by spamming similar messages mere days before the game's release to discourage people from buying it. But as more trailers for the game released, which got me more excited and quashed some of my concerns from before, I didn't fall victim to this again and did get Origami King. So I wanted to make a video about my experience and impressions of the game across my first playthrough, as I finished it several months ago too, while hopefully getting across how this game is certainly not another Sticker Star. Oh, and spoilers of course. Admittedly, even before this game was announced, I thought an origami concept for a Paper Mario game would actually be kinda cool because of all the potential mechanics you could design around that. And while the origami itself is sadly not a factor in the gameplay for the most part, as I would have liked it if they did something like the curses from Thousand Year Door but expanded upon, I really liked how they utilized it for the visuals. I've always liked how they executed the papery look of the environments in the later games, and I think Origami King does that the best with how they show some of the intricacies of the origami figures. I believe the developers even made actual origami to help visualize how these things would look in-game, and while I know nothing about origami, I think they captured that very well. As part of the origami theme, it also plays into the companion character for this game, Olivia, who, in my opinion, is a major improvement over previous characters in this position from what I've experienced. In Sticker Star, we had Kirsty, and while I didn't dislike her, I thought she was very boring overall, aside from the occasional witty remark. Meanwhile, Olivia has more of an actual character, being that she's typically naive and kinda ditzy, whilst being pretty upbeat. Plus, she has a personal stake and struggle in the story with her being Ollie's sister. She's not the most fleshed out character in the world, but it's something that stands out. And she also has some legitimate involvement in gameplay other than to just finish off the final boss through the use of the Vellumental powers to solve puzzles, giving her more of a reason to actually exist in the story. What's also a big improvement over the previous two games is the battle system. In spite of how all the reviews criticize this part, I think that, for the most part, it's pretty good. Mario is placed in the center of an arena while the enemies surround him on movable segments. Your job is to reposition the enemies into lines and square formations to both effectively take them out and give Mario an attack boost to achieve that. I like this unique style of strategy and puzzle solving this adds to battles, as it gives you an additional element you need to think about to increase your chances of success. And there are a few mechanics like the Vellumental powers appearing here and several enemies that put a spin on this formula to mix up your thinking. Though I will admit, I think they could have done more to flesh out this concept. I was really hoping there would be occasional features like terrain that inflicts different effects on enemies to further emphasize where you position them, so I was disappointed to see that potential missed. Furthermore, I don't know if this is just me being stupid, but there were plenty of times where it felt nigh impossible to solve the puzzle in these battles and prevented me from killing them all. Mario also has access to equipable boots and hammers to select from in combat, which are stronger than the standard options and can have additional buffs too, but they break after a certain number of uses. This takes the concept of a attacks that manage resources idea from Sticker Star that I liked, but executed much better. You always have your standard jump and hammer in the worst case scenario, and your equipable weapons don't break after one use. But I did find it annoying not having access to the weapon for the rest of the fight and having to go into the menu and equip another of the same one afterwards. I think it would have been better if once one of your weapons breaks and you have another of that same weapon in your inventory, it would automatically be equipped in that slot. This would have allowed me to equip more types of weapons to be better prepared for whatever may be thrown at me, rather than equipping multiples of the same one out of fear of them breaking in the middle of a major fight. However, one thing I fully dislike about battles in this game is that you can't see the enemy's health, and there isn't anything like a peekaboo badge to reveal this. Plus, some enemies have way too much health from what I can gather. These two things combined together make damage feel almost unavoidable in some encounters, despite how much the game sort of encourages you to win unscathed. Whenever I would find one of the weapons from a tier stronger than the ones I was currently using, I felt very hesitant to use them because I thought it would be best to save them for a boss or later chapter. But then I would find myself being unable to finish off all the enemies in one turn and repeatedly face their wrath, especially with their stronger combination attacks. This kind of brought down my mood a lot when playing the game, as battles started to feel like a chore when this occurred. Whereas, I think if I could see the enemy's HP, I would have been less hesitant and thus it would have circumvented this issue. Though enemies having less HP would help too. I mean, when I found the legendary tier weapons, I thought, those must be super rare. I better save them for the final boss. But you don't even use any of your normal attacks in the final boss fight, so I never used these. So overall, I think the battle system is good, but there's certainly room for improvement if they bring this approach back for the next game. Now, unfortunately, just like Sticker Star and Color Splash, battles do not give you experience. But on the upside, they have improved this aspect too, as there is an incentive for battling here, being the confetti needed for filling in holes throughout the world. While you can get plenty of confetti around the environments, there are moments, namely in dungeons, where it can be scarcer, and in these moments I did find myself starting battles for the purpose of getting confetti. It's not as good of an incentive as simply having experience points, and I definitely would have preferred it if that was here, but now battles do have a legitimate purpose. As for boss battles, they mix things up even further. Now the boss is located at the center, and it's your job to guide Mario towards them using these arrow markers, since he can't walk freely now for some reason. I have more mixed feelings about this approach though. I do like some aspects of how they execute this idea, such as the health, power boosts, additional commands, and so on you can collect along the way. But I do think it's a bit too gimmicky, and left me thinking why I can't just fight them normally. In the first boss fight against the Earth Elemental, I found it very confusing to grasp the exact directions the arrows would ultimately make Mario go. Alongside the pressure from the time limit, I had to restart multiple times out of frustration until I decided to cheat the whole thing by using the Switch's capture button and plan everything out from there. Though as I fought more bosses across the story, I did find myself doing this less until I ended up not using it anymore aside from the ice maze. So I became less critical of it, but still don't like it as much as standard battles. And one thing I absolutely hate about boss fights is how they explain to you what you need to do. There are these letters present over the battlefield, and if Mario walks over it, then it gives you a hint about what you need to do or something to watch out for. The problem is that at this point, you have already decided your route, so you are fully committed to it. There were numerous times where I went about the same strategy I was using for the rest of the fight as I didn't know what to expect, only for the letter to tell me I was doing the incorrect thing when I can't change my move, so I ended up screwing myself due to the game's stupidity. I have no idea why they did it like this. For example, when I was fighting Colored Pencils, as he was charging his super attack, I went to close his lid like I'd done for the rest of the fight. But then the letter tells me I can't do that during this moment, so I wasted my turn and had to face the full force of that attack. The only times this dumb feature didn't fuck with me was when it was blatantly obvious what to do or from some lucky, educated guesswork. And as for the bosses themselves, all of the world/chapter bosses, save for the final boss, are the members of the Legion of Stationery, who are sentient pieces of stationery. Yeah, I think this is a really dumb and boring idea for bosses. They try to give them some standout personalities, but the whole concept is so lame that it brings them down. The only one I thought was somewhat interesting was Rubber Bands, because he starts out as a mummy made of rubber bands. I think it would have been much better if they were replaced with other origami beings like Ollie and Olivia, who Ollie created to act as generals in his army. So after I took care of Colored Pencils and destroyed the first streamer, where I also first witnessed how chapters in this game effectively start right after one another, I met this game's first partner, Bobby. I got attached to this guy very quickly because he's the first partner in years, and I've severely missed that mechanic all this time. Plus, he has such an innocent and carefree personality that makes me want to protect him. Now, as I said before, partners do have a smaller role in this game. They each only have one attack that has a random chance of succeeding after Mario finishes his turn, they are only temporary recruits, and they do not appear in boss fights. However, I still found their presence very helpful due to how much damage their attacks do when they succeed, as they could finish off an enemy that I was just barely unable to kill before they can act, saving me some grief over my enemies having too much health issue. So I hope that their return can pave the way for them to be more involved in the future. Especially when it comes to the boss fight thing, because Bobby certainly would have been great for the rubber band fight, and I need to go on a mini rant about how frustrating this fight was for me, because I swear, the game lied to me. So you need to use the rubber bands he shoots to get closer to him and deal effective damage. But I vividly remember the first time walking over these bands, and it just hurt me and ended my turn. As such, I kept making sure to avoid them and being left unable to reach closer than 2 rings so he'd heal from all the damage. I only realized the bands help you by complete accident, and I was so pissed off. I had to restart this fight so many times out of that frustration and to save all the coins I wasted to literally buy more time. Anyway, back on track. Aside from Bobby's introduction and excluding the rubber band fight, I actually quite enjoyed Chapter 2 when it's never been one I really cared for that much in the other games. Partly because it wasn't a desert world like most Mario games, and also from how I really liked the settings of Autumn Mountain and Shogun Studios just from the ideas and visuals. Then as I was about to enter Chapter 3, I hit a roadblock that led to the cruel method of establishing that partners are only temporary, as I reached the game's big shocking moment. No, he can't be gone. The other Bob-omb partners came back instantly after exploding. Why not Bobby? This can't be right! Oh my god, they just killed someone off in a freaking Mario game! The only thing that could have made this scene sadder is if Prosafia Gaming didn't fucking spoil it shortly after recruiting him. Seriously, this is supposed to be such a sad moment alongside the unexpected event of a death in a Mario game, and I just had all that shock value robbed from me. As I tried to compose myself from what limited sadness I could feel from a spoiled death, we reached Chapter 3, which now is the desert world. But I liked it way more than most other Mario desert worlds because they did something unique with it. It's at night, like all the time, until you destroy the streamer. And I really like the dark and purple color scheme it gives the sand during this period. Then you also arrive at the funky and pretty Sniff City, in which I shall forever refer to it as such, where I like that they gave the Sniffets some love for once. Even if I had to spend many resets to prove to myself I can beat the guessing game without the second chance handicap. The partner for this chapter is Professor Toad, where I found it interesting to see a Toad partner for once. And while I rarely gave him the chance to attack, his attack is really good for crowd control. In contrast, one thing I hated about this chapter was the Fire Elemental fight, because it's so poorly designed. If you ever use the 1000-fold arms earlier than when you're supposed to, which the game never tells you to avoid by the way, then it fully recovers health, effectively meaning you have to restart the entire fight. What a cruel punishment for a simple mistake anyone could make, as I did several times. For once, I had a far more enjoyable time dealing with the Legion of Stationery member, Hole Punch, as I had to gather up a bunch of faceless toads for a sweet raid party! Oh, and the fight wasn't really that bad. Then I progressed on to Chapter 4, or as I like to call it, Wind Waker! This might have been my favorite chapter in the game because I really enjoyed how different it was in design, but still fun. I liked the layouts and puzzles that came with all the islands, and the overall puzzle of figuring out what order to go in with the mandatory ones. Although I did manage to correctly guess the answer to the location of Diamond Island from seeing the second of the Symbol Islands. But I also really like the concept of this ancient island at the bottom of the ocean, and how pretty the hub area is, which also continued into the final destination at the Sky Tower, where I had to face off against the most sinister villain of them all, Tape! And in the middle of all these events is when you meet Ollie and Olivia's creator, who gives some bizarre exposition. So there's this technique called the Fold of Life, which makes origami figures come alive. Okay, that's gotta be the most random and nonsensical piece of lore I've seen in a game. So the Toad craftsman used the Fold of Life on Ollie, but then Ollie turned against him and used the technique to give Olivia life and create his entire origami army to conquer the Mushroom Kingdom. And after defeating the villainous Tape, the way to Chapter 5 literally came immediately afterwards, straight up into Shangri-Spa. Once again, I like the visuals of this place. It reminds me of the second half of Chapter 7 in Super Paper Mario, but now it's just a spa. In heaven! But it didn't feel so much like heaven when it came to the gameplay, as I found this part kind of mundane in that aspect. Just wander around to give Bowser Jr. a bunch of baths. Plus, I hated most of the enemies here because they have so much health. And while I didn't bother to get all the hidden toads, as I felt it would be too time-consuming, it bugged the shit out of me why I couldn't find the one toad here, only to barely notice a tiny gap at the beginning which led to him. The most exciting part of the gameplay here, aside from the bosses, was getting Kamek as a partner. The reveal trailer made me think that Mario teaming up with Bowser's army was going to be a bigger part of the story, so I was disappointed to see that only now show up here, but Kamek is great in battle regardless. He too is great for crowd control, and I only saw his attack fail once. Meanwhile, for the bosses, despite being very far in the game now, I found myself performing much better at these fights than most of the ones before. Starting off with Scissors, where I didn't suffer from the stupid design choice with the notes, as his own dialogue effectively gave me the information I needed. Even though I'm assuming his cut attack is an insta-kill, given how dangerous they make it out to be. I actually never got hit by it. One shoot-'em-up sequence and an airship crash later, I make it to Peach's relocated castle for the final chapter. Reminds me a lot of the first game with this setup. You know, until Ollie transforms the whole thing into his own origami castle. This time, we have Bowser as a partner. While he's just a square, he is by far the best one. His attack hits all enemies in a line or group for a ton of damage, and from what I've seen, it never fails. The origami castle itself was also surprisingly easy for me despite the constant hazards underneath. It was only the occasional enemy that gave me trouble. Not even the final member of the Legion of Stationery, Stapler, was that much of a challenge. It was more time consuming where I needed to heal from damage accumulated over time rather than him doing anything devastating. So with Bowser restored to normal and after one final pep talk of Olivia, it was time to confront Ollie once and for all. Building on the absurdity of the voodoo origami magic, there is another forbidden technique in which if a person folds 1,000 paper cranes, they are granted one wish. And his whole motivation for being evil is that the craftsman scribbled on his body, which he sees as being defiled, and incites toad racism by saying, "All toads are the same." Which I like to think is intelligent systems poking fun at the common complaint with the newer games of all the NPCs being generic toads. Now for the final battle against Ollie, which is just a rehash of the Vellumental fights. The other two phases are fine, I guess, but they're more quick-time puzzles rather than an RPG battle. With his ability to refold himself into tons of different shapes, I was hoping for so much more, so I felt kinda let down. And after defeating Ollie, it is revealed that what the craftsman scribbled on his body was a note wishing for him to be a kind king. This entire game could have been avoided if he just looked down. I know it's supposed to be ironic, but I find it both funny and frustrating at the same time. Turning Ollie into the 1,000th crane, Olivia is now given the chance to make a wish, in which she sacrifices herself to wish for everything Ollie did to be undone. I was not expecting this game to end off on such a bittersweet and somewhat somber note. Now we have 2 good guy deaths in a Mario game. While this game's story is very simple and a bit silly too, I will give them major props for actually going through with something like this. The idea itself sounds like something that would happen in Thousand Year Door and Super. And that's a phrase I think best sums up why I believe this game to be an improvement over the previous 2. It features things that are akin to the older games. In a way, it is essentially a mixture of the older and newer formats. Even though I do have a couple of gripes with this game, I very much enjoyed it overall. This game is good. Not as good as the older ones, but it's certainly a step in the right direction by bringing back features from those games, leaving me with a feeling of hope that we may see intelligent systems take further steps in that direction to give a greater sense of some return to form. Things like having more original characters, a slightly more fleshed out story, and giving partners a bigger role again. Though that depends on how much of a say Miyamoto would have, and if he still thinks the same way he did during Sticker Star's development. And even if we could sadly never see a full return to form for the series, I would still be very satisfied if the games continue to follow the same format as Origami King, just with some tweaks and improvements. That's why I strongly disagree when I see people call this game another Sticker Star and say it's exactly the same as the last 2. Because if that were the case, then it wouldn't have done all the things I just covered in this video. So if in the future the next game is revealed to be something like Paper Mario Quilling Quest, I would look forward to it. Unless the trailers suggested them taking steps back.